Hi folks, welcome back to the retirement question. Hope you're having a great day. Good week so far. As you can tell, I'm back out on the water, my favorite place, especially on the way home from work. And you know what? Something happened. I have to share this with you because up until just recently, I was so sure about my decision to want to retire. And, I even came up with a date, all this planning I've been doing. And something over the last couple weeks, if even sooner than that, has kind of changed. And I'm trying to figure out what that is. Because I was so confident that I was going to retire, and in my case, early retire. And that's what this video is about. Whether to continue to work, a little bit longer, pivot, could be into maybe a part-time role or something remote, or just go ahead and pull the plug and go ahead and retire. So that's what I want to talk about today. As a bird flies off, and I've got some beautiful lily pads, look like they're in full bloom, really nice yellow flower. So this video is about, what to do. And why am I thinking this way? I was so sure that, I was done with work, or at least done with this job, maybe temporarily or permanently, and, ready for that next phase of my life called, early retirement. But something happened on the way to work, I guess you could say. And that is this kind of indecision that just kind of popped up. And I'm not sure if it's indecision or the fact that, the time is actually getting closer and closer when I'm actually planning to pull the plug, or at least I was planning to pull the plug. So, what to do, and what would you do? If you've been in this same situation, what was your, mindset? How did you come up with, whatever decision you decided to go forward with? And that's what I'm working on myself. And as far as my first option, I was thinking, well, you know what? I could just work a little bit longer. Could be 6 months, could be a year. And then I was thinking all the reasons to keep working. Could be the money, maybe a little bit more security as far as, adding a little bit more to my silos, whether it's a 401k, savings. And also, maybe is this the right time to pull the plug? With the market kind of being a little bit shaky and high inflation. I'm thinking of all these reasons to keep working, or at least a little bit longer. But then, what can happen is that, 6 months turns into a year turns into 18 months, 2 years, 3, 4, 5 years. And guess what? You're still working. And that is what could happen. And it does happen for a lot of people, where maybe they're just not quite ready to pull the plug on work for whatever reason. It could be financial, it could be for maybe just the health benefits, especially if you're under the age of 65 and you're not, yet qualified to receive Medicare. There is, definitely an out-of-pocket cost for that type of health care. So, there's a host of reasons why people may want to, including yourself, want to keep on working. So that's kind of the first option, just work a little bit longer. But then, you can end up moving the goalpost where you don't leave work. You just keep going and going. And then, there's no end. There's no finish line. It's just protracted, it just goes on and on. So that's the first option. Just keep working a little bit longer. The next option is to pivot. And what I mean by pivot is to possibly keep working, but maybe do something else, maybe something different. Or even if it is something similar to what I'm doing now, maybe do it remotely, whether from home or wherever I want that to be, where maybe I have a little bit more flexibility with my schedule and I don't have to be somewhere at a certain time, and maybe I don't have to see clients or patients. So that's like the second option, is to pivot into something else, and maybe something that I turned out to love doing. And it could be either on a full-time basis, part-time basis, contract. That's always an option. So that's kind of like the second option, just to not keep working, my current role or whatever role you're in, but to pivot into something a little different, or it could be a lot different, whether your current company or, something, of your own, as maybe an independent contractor where you have your own business and maybe a little bit more flexibility. So that's kind of option number 2, is to pivot it into something possibly similar but different. But then again, I may fall into that trap of moving that goalpost of actually retiring. And, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and still be working. And I've been talking for, extensively about this early retiring and, my life after work. But then again, it's another way of just moving that goalpost. So that's the second option. So to pivot into something different, whether for yourself or for the same company or even a different company. And the third option is just to, go ahead and pull the plug on work. Go ahead and retire and do what I plan to do in the first place. And that is to, leave my job and start this next phase of my life called retirement. So, and there's a lot of good reasons to want to do that. For one thing, like I've mentioned before, there's no guarantees about how long, you'll live in retirement, and what that retirement might look like. Are you going to be, healthy and, have your mobility? Or do you retire and, within a month or two, you can't get out of the house or you can't get out of bed? So that could be an option too, or I guess a consequence of not retiring now and kind of extending it, whether to continue, working your current role or pivoting into something different, or possibly with a new company. So that's where I'm at, Do I stay a little longer, 6 months to 5 years, pivot into something else where, I may still end up being there for months or years, or just go ahead and pull the plug and start this next phase of my life called early retirement. So if you would, kind of share with me your thoughts. What would you do? What's your suggestion or suggestions? Which option would you choose, either for yourself or, if you have any ideas for, the rest of us, including me. So, and if it's your first time here, thank you for joining. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day and listening to me talk about, my situation. And it may be similar to your situation. So, what would you do? Keep working? Could be a little bit longer. Could turn out to be years longer. And then that may cut your retirement quite a bit. Or would you pivot into something else where maybe you have a little more flexibility? Something different, maybe something remote, maybe a new company, maybe your own company. That's an option. Or number 3, just go ahead and retire. What would you do and why? What's your thinking? What's your thought process on what you would do and why you would do it? So if you would, please share that in the comments. I'd love to hear the rest of us, would really, gain from each other's knowledge, experience. Have you done any one of these 3 things or a combination of all 3 things? That's also possible. Start with one and then pivot into something different and then just retire at some point. So, what would you do and why? And if you've been here before, thank you for coming back. I appreciate your loyalty. If you please like the channel, the content. Like I like to say, come for the content and stay for the show. And usually at this point, since I'm still working, you'll find me out on the water, or maybe I'm hiking, or I love the outdoors, especially with weather like this and beautiful things, with these blooming lily pads out here. It looks amazing. So please share your thoughts, any suggestions you have as far as experiences that you've had, maybe doing any one of the 3 or all of the 3. Please share in the comments. So once again, appreciate you being here. Thank you and have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.